Alright guys, on the last video y'all told me that y'all wanted me to come out here and talk about some risky players. Maybe some guys that, yeah, they have upside, they can come out here and we can easily see them breaking out. But at the same time, we're like, you know what? We are looking at the projections provided by Fantasy Pros. I want to remind everyone, I know you're tired of hearing it, but I am by no means a fantasy baseball expert. I cannot come up with my own projections. So we are going to be using projections from Fantasy Pros. This is not a sponsorship. This is not an ad. This isn't anything other than they're providing them for free and we are going to take advantage. So yeah, let's dive into some of these projections and some of these ADPs for where they are being drafted currently and try to see if we can spot a couple hitters that I think maybe, I don't want to say are just straight up being overdrafted, but someone that if you take them, you have to acknowledge the fact that there is a decent amount of downside as we don't have large samples of these young players providing us consistent production in the fantasy baseball just because they haven't done it before, so they are merely a projection. Now, of course, before we get into the guys, go down there, drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. It helps us out a ton. And our first player that we are going to be talking about is going at the end of the second round on a team that I really don't even like. I don't want to be drafting their players this year. This is going to be Kyle Tucker, who right now, I don't understand it. He's 24 years old. He has an ADP of 29. So yeah, in late second, early third, whatever you want to call it. I just cannot get behind this selection whenever he's going behind Xander Bogaerts. And if we go right now, look at Kyle Tucker. I mean, right now, Fantasy Pros has him projected to see 563 at-bats this season, 267 for his batting average, a 485 slugging, a 327 on-base percentage. And to go through, I mean, first, these projections by no means are fantastic. I mean, you don't see these numbers and go, you know what, that's a player I want at the beginning of the third. That's a player that I think we can build this team around. You go, okay, one, the projections don't line up with the ADP, so clearly people are getting a little bit too excited, according to Fantasy Pros, with the overall upside that is going to be provided by Kyle Tucker. And if we go through, and I think we can see the upside, we can understand it slightly if we just look at what he's been able to do in the minor league versus Major League Baseball. I mean, in the minor league, he had a incredible sample size. He started playing at 18 years old. So obviously the aggregate for his entire career is going to be a little bit skewed as you're not expecting a player to be 18 years old, go in there and have above 500 slugging, a batting average close to 300, and an on-base percentage over 350. Obviously, those are not going to be the expectations for an 18-year-old, but when we are evaluating these samples, we want as many data points that we can possibly get. And we also know a ton of the other players that he was playing with in the minor league are also on the younger side. So you can't just completely lean on that excuse. And he had about 2,000 at-bats in the minor league. I mean, he has an incredible sample where his batting average was 283, his on-base percentage was 356, and the slugging was 507. So I know these numbers are good. I don't think they are good enough, though, to justify this draft position. When he's playing in a lineup like the Houston Astros, if we look at his Major League Baseball sample, I mean, it's pretty small. There's only 340 at-bats. And in that small sample, I mean, he has been nothing close to special. He's had a 244 average, a 306 on-base percentage, and a 459 slugging. So I simply don't understand why he's going ahead of some veterans like Xander Bogaerts that is going to be able to be a much safer projection. You really understand what you are going to get. Because with Kyle Tucker, I mean, I understand the argument for some of the other players that are going to be on this list and that you could say, hey, I understand they're risky, but the upside is immense. I don't even know if the upside's that high with Kyle Tucker. I couldn't see myself drafting him in the early third or the late second a single time. Okay, so now our next player is going at the very end of the third round, the beginning of the fourth, and this is going to be Louise Roberts, who is another one of these guys that has a large sample in the minors, but the major sample is pretty small. And at least he is playing in a lineup that's a little bit more desirable. I mean, obviously, we are not going to be anything close to scared of drafting those Chicago White Sox players. But here with Roberts, I mean, if we look at his sample in the minor leagues, we're not going to look at his sample overseas. That's something that, I mean, he's like 15 years old whenever he started playing. So that's nothing to deal with us. We're just going to look at the minor league and the majors. And in the minors, I mean, he had some solid numbers here. Definitely better than what we saw from Kyle Tucker, and he's in a better lineup. So I'm saying, like, why the hell would you ever draft Kyle Tucker over Roberts in this range? Because in the minors, he had a 312 average, a 381 on base percentage, and a 551 slugging. I know the majors numbers aren't necessarily fantastic. The sample size is small. It's only 200 at-bats. And he had a 233 average, a 302 on base percentage, and a 436 slugging. So here I'll say, out of both of these ADPs, I understand Roberts a little bit more because you go, well, yes, the major league sample isn't great. At least we have a nice thing to look at in what he was able to do with the minors. And I think that the projections here are a little bit more favorable with what Fantasy Pros is giving him, with 554 at-bats, a 257 average, a 306 on base percentage, and a 466 slugging. All right, so now let's get to quite possibly the most polarizing player in fantasy baseball this year. I know we made a video saying, hey, if you want someone that can do this, go and draft him. He has upside. He has a ton of it, but he is risky. It's going to be Boba Shetty, who right now is being drafted at the end of the second round with an ADP of 24. And he's only 22, 23 years old, so obviously that's something that you go, okay, we're not expecting a player like this to have the history of dominating at the major league level. But at the same time, you go, okay, this is a second round pick. Are you sure you're willing to make that type of investment? Because the projection here, it's going to be volatile. I mean, it's not going to be extremely sticky. It's not going to be extremely predictive. Well, right now they're projecting him to have about 581 at-bats, a 285 average, a 330 on base percentage, and a 487 slugging. So definitely by far and away the best player in terms of Fantasy Pros projection on this list. But at the same time, he's going to cost you that second round pick in the majority of the cases. And we've already talked about that late second, early third. That's kind of a range where I like to be drafting some of these pitchers. I know that some other hitters in this range I'm not necessarily extremely thrilled about, like a Bryce Harper. But anyway, let's go back to Bo's minor league and major league career up to date, where in the minors, I mean, these are some very impressive numbers. And keep in mind, I mean, he was there incredibly young, where he had 1,300 at-bats. He had a 321 average, a 380 on base percentage, and a 515 slugging. And then you go to his majors, and his majors, I mean, these are great numbers, where he had a 307 average, a 347 on base percentage, and a 549 slugging. Where the one thing I want to point out about this is it's only off of 319 at-bats. So I know a lot of people want to just see those numbers and go, okay, that's something we can expect, but you can't. I mean, when you only have 319 at-bats to look at, even with the player that you're viewing as a guy that's going to continue to still develop, I don't know if we can say that is extremely predictive. But anyway, to kind of recap the video, pretty much the one thing I want to come across with is I want to make sure that y'all go, okay, Kyle Tucker, the upside isn't necessarily through the roof, and the floor is going to be very low. Kyle Tucker, probably a player we want to be avoiding. If you want to go out there and you want to draft Roberts, if you want to go out there and you want to draft Bo, I'm fine in those scenarios. But Tucker, that's a player that I want nothing to do with. Now, thank you guys. I really hope y'all enjoyed this video. I really hope y'all got something from it. As always, if y'all did, go down there, drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. It helps us out a ton, and I'll see y'all with the video tomorrow.